Hey everyone, I'm Lamar with MedRank Interactive. I have Sarah Connolly here, and she's just going to just be with us today and provide us with a wealth of information and knowledge. And glad to have her on the Healthcare Digital Marketing Podcast. So, Sarah, I'd just love to kind of open up. I think you and I met through Eric Kirch, who he's just a a all around networker. He's very popular in the healthcare space, and he connected us together, and I'm excited to have you on the podcast. Would love to just open up to just learn about you, just tell the audience who you are, and why you started your firm and type of services that you offer.
Absolutely. And Lamar, I'm so glad that we met through Eric. You're right. He is a master connector. He connected us all the way from, I'm here in St. Pete, and you're up in Charlotte. But being in the healthcare universe, you know this as well as anybody, Lamar, the longer you're in it, the smaller the universe is. And it's so important to meet people that are like-minded and that really have this industry focus. So this is actually a match made in heaven, Lamar. I love your services, and doctors need you. I know we were just talking about that before we jumped on, that it's just so important in 2021 and beyond that doctors have a personal brand. But for me, might surprise you or your audience to know that I'm a lawyer. Don't hold that against me. I like to say I'm one of the good ones. You don't usually hear lawyers talking about marketing and branding, but I'm a fractional general counsel for growing healthcare companies, businesses that need a consistent legal resource, but don't need a full-time in-house. So that means I do everything that you would typically knock on an in-house's door, but I do it on an outsourced or fractional basis. So contracts, corporate, HR, of course, in healthcare, regulatory compliance, those dirty words that I'll try not to say too much. Those are all really my wheelhouse. Love what I do. I consider myself an entrepreneur first, a lawyer second. But there's really kind of a mindset. This is true of doctors and of lawyers, that this isn't what I went to medical school or law school to do. I want to practice. I want to see patients. I want to focus on the law, when we should all view ourselves as entrepreneurs. You are running a business, growing a business, hiring people, facing all the same challenges.
Right.
And even for my docs that are in big organizations, because they say, well, that's not me, that's the organization. I preach entrepreneurialism. You should be making your mark within organizations. You should be using the power of that organization to
Right.
build your brand and use those resources. So I'm so excited to join today, because I think we're kindred spirits and your audiences as well.
Awesome. Thank you for just elaborating on that. And I think just it's an honor to hear you say those kind of words. But I reflect that back to you as well, because what you offer to a lot of these physicians and doctors is well needed. And it's kind of like in the same, right, where we're both not in their office, but we help them with a lot of the things they need to help them grow their business and become successful without them having to worry about it, right? And
Yeah.
I think it's well needed. So tell me about, like, how did you get into this industry? How did this all start?
Well, I could spend all day talking about kind of my winding road of entrepreneurialism, but really at the core, the reason why I started my own law firm and why I'm running what I think is really a pretty unique model. I liken it kind of concierge. I mean, your audience will know that term, where it's your on-call person, they're your go-to expert, and I do alternative fees. It's almost a subscription where, based on what size company and kind of where you are in your life cycle, will really dictate what your legal needs are. And I have different tiers of services, depending on where you fall. What that's really designed to do, and what really makes me tick, is I want you to view your lawyer as an extension of the team rather than a cost of doing business.
Yeah.
Marketing is another great example of where, oh, this is just a line item on my P&L, but it's really a way that you can catalyze growth for your company and keep yourself out of trouble. Let's be honest, negative Google reviews, a bad optic online. I mean, if you're burying your head in the sand, you're going to get in trouble. And the same goes in the legal realm. So having somebody somebody that can be proactive and strategic, and God forbid when the proverbial stuff hits the fan, so you don't have to edit that, you've got somebody that you can call.
Right. No, that's awesome. And so with, I guess, like, what are the typical, do you get a lot of physicians coming to you when it's urgent, like it's hit the fan, or do you get a lot of them, that understand and see the value that you provide from a legal or HR standpoint to really help them along the way?
You know what? I would say more of the former. Call me when there's a crisis,
Right.
when I'm really trying to educate, and anytime I meet somebody that might need my services, there's a learning curve to understand
Yeah.
where, taking some preventative action is really gonna serve you in the future. I know you have a similar dialogue with your clients where it's incremental. There's laying the foundation. It's not the moment you hire a lawyer, everything's fixed. The moment you hire a marketer, all the patients come running in. But you have to do that soul searching as a physician and a provider. The
Right.
things that you're really, really good at is direct patient care. You might be a great leader for your team. I mean, there are many great things that you could say about yourself, but be also insightful about where your weaknesses are. And they do not teach you this in medical school. They should, the same way they should in law school.
Right.
But marketing and personal brand and distinguishing yourself in a super saturated market, which is true of any type of provider, you're just not going to be able to do that by just providing great patient care.
Right.
More than that.
Right. That's awesome. And we'll definitely jump to the personal brand side of things. I know you have some great thoughts there. When it comes to your services and your firm overall, where do you see, I guess, the most legal concerns, like with a lot of your doctors? And we'll love to just understand how you start that process with them when they contact you.
Sure. So I'll start with the marketing piece and then we can unpack a little bit in kind of day-to-day practice. But when you're putting out messaging and using an outsourced marketing team like yours is a great way to make sure you don't have a foot fault here, because that's certainly part of what you do every day is knowing you can't use that song without a license and you can't say that without some kind of disclaimer, right?
Right.
So I'm always very careful about anytime you put out content, and please, 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 if you are a doctor putting out content, keep doing it. It will get better and better. You will see the traction.
Yep.
Just be careful about, of course, patient confidentiality. You can talk about generalities, but not naming anybody or, anything that's really considered protected health information.
Right.
And you're talking in generalities, right? It does depend on the case. Make sure you talk to your individual physician. But there's so much you can do. 98% of what you want to say, you can say, and that's very valuable. And they want to hear from doctors who don't sound like the Charlie Brown teacher, like the wah 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 wah. Very, very brilliant people, but just not really relatable.
Yeah.
We know you're brilliant. We want to know what makes you tick. We want to know what excites you about your practice, right? So I say, don't be so nervous about what you're putting out. You're unlikely to trip up legal requirements by just staying within those lane lines. In terms of other potential liabilities, my goodness, we could probably spend another day just on that topic, but certainly, really 30,000 foot view, make sure that you're doing the introspection on what you really want to do. I know that sounds so obvious, but I know there's a lot of disenchanted docs out there, right? They're solo practitioners that are really struggling to run their small business, because that's really what it is, to those that feel kind of lost or feel like they're just one of a number in a big health system. And the reality is there's need for providers everywhere in every specialty in any manner. And maybe you're not wanting to be a practicing clinician, but you want to do academia or thought leadership or physician leadership development. I mean, you've got to stick close to what you love and what you're good at. So that's not really legal advice, but I've seen so many doctors with bad breakups with partners, right?
Right.
Or, they're stuck in really restrictive non-competes, right? And it's like they didn't really know what they were signing on for, and they didn't really do that really uncomfortable in your gut, what works for me. So I know that doesn't sound like a typical lawyer, but I think that's so important at those kind of career thresholds.
Now, this is awesome because a lot of people pay for this advice.
That is true. And I'm not the cheapest on the block, but I think you get a lot of value.
That's awesome. And
Thank you.
just one last thought on the services side of things.
Yeah.
Do you service all across the U.S.? Like, what's your target area?
Great question. So I'm only barred in Florida. So for giving state specific advice, it's really here in Florida.
Okay.
But what I like to tell my clients, because I do have a national presence, last I checked, I think I was in 20 states, maybe 21 now.
Right.
But giving a lot of what we do is federal. HIPAA, right? Your employment laws. I mean, yes, there's state specific where I'll say this I can't help, but I'll get you a great local referral. But a lot of what you do in the medical space is federal and contract based, right? So a lot of what really drives your business isn't really state specific. I do get questions about defending actions against your license, and I really can only do that here in Florida. So
Gotcha.
to cut that off at the pass, I do get a lot of those, and I can only practice, and I don't go to court either. So I will handle those here in Florida. Other than that, I pride myself on having a great network of referrals.
Awesome. That's awesome. And so you mentioned earlier about the personal brand and for physicians to put themselves out there. What are your thoughts on how they can do that, effectively?
Do it, just do it.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have said it like that, because I know that big company, if they hear me, it's going to come after me, but hopefully none of them are. But really, just take the step and start. I really do recommend using a group like yours, Lamar, especially one that has medical experience, because it really is kind of a unique niche compared to other lifestyle businesses and a lot of the other kind of branding that you see. And patients have a certain expectation of what they want to see from their doctor. So you do have to take a leap of faith. It isn't why you went to medical school, but it is important for your patients to see you and hear you, and for you to have a consistent online presence. The reality is, unless you're going to pay an arm and a leg for really expensive SEO, it's really about getting fresh content out there and really speaking and knowing your audience.
Yeah.
I'll echo, because my husband is a user experience researcher for a large health system. So this is literally our pillow talk. Like, we're obsessed with this stuff.
Nice.
Stop thinking about your patient experience as just your concierge that welcomes them into the building, or just the time that you spend with them and what your bedside manner is. Your patient experience really starts online. The vast majority of patients find you, I hate to say it, it's not because you're a great doc, because you are, but they found you because you take their insurance and you're close by. So there are going to be a lot of other doctors that take their insurance and are close by. So how do you come to the forefront of, you really want to come see me? And the way you do that is by developing a personal brand and really humanizing yourself, because ultimately people buy based on emotion, but it starts by finding you on freaking Google. So make sure you're on social.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're exactly right. And I think part of that too is really showing your personality, because a lot of these patients are looking at, a list of doctors on Google and they don't know who to select from. They may have just moved to the area, but if they can see your personality, see your brand, your style, and your messaging is consistent, and you're speaking to their pain points, it really helps them connect with you online for them to make a buying decision in terms of being treated. And so no, you're exactly right, and that starts with just the language and the overall, the personality of the website. Because sometimes what you'll see websites that are prehistoric designs like 1997 and I don't fault these doctors sometimes, but I'm just like, you gotta change the brand. You gotta make it more creative, because nowadays, to your point, everyone's on their smartphone, they're on their computer, and that's where they're living is online. So it's very effective to be able to connect with them at that, where they are.
Uh,
Um,
y- You said that so eloquently, Lamar. I can't wait for this recording because I'll ask you to steal that portion. So it's not just me on this soapbox, it's you too.
Yep. That's awesome. So back to the legal side of things, what are the biggest risks that you see for physicians or doctors during COVID?
So surprisingly, maybe it's not really around infection control because we have all learned, and doctors were already good at this. This is just viruses are really small particles, and this one's especially transmittable. But we've been doing infection control since the advent of medicine, right? So between hand hygiene and proper mask usage, I mean, you all know that. I don't need to tell you that again. Where your risk really lies are with your employees.
Mm,
So make sure that you are following all regulations. They're primarily federal, but they're state as well on granting leave, reasonable accommodations when somebody can work remotely, making sure you understand that they may be able to or be granted leave to care for a loved one, not just if they test positive, making sure that you're being really careful about wage and hour, right? Keeping time properly, because those are just the distractions that you don't need. And while certainly from a moral perspective, you need to make sure that you're being very, very communicative and very, very compassionate to your team during this time. I mean, this is an absolute crisis of healthcare burnout. So, there's minimum legal requirements that you need to meet, or you're going to get yourself in really hot water. If you want to keep really good people who are like really suffering from burnout issues, then go above and beyond, right? Employee assistance programs, mental health counseling, even just informal check-ins. Be careful about asking HIPAA information from your employees, but I've noticed you've been feeling a little bit off. Are you okay? Can we check in? You want to take 10 minutes to talk? Is there anything else I can do to support you? Because really employee liability is going to be a much bigger and has been a much bigger issue than the virus control itself, which doctors are pretty good at. There's also a lot of emerging, and North Carolina is one of them, that has good immunity laws, meaning if you in good faith, really paraphrasing this, but if you in good faith are following infection control protocols, unless you're grossly negligent or you failed to do anything, you're really probably going to withstand a lawsuit for someone getting COVID at your practice. That's if they can even prove that they got it there, right? So again, I think people focus too much on, of course, you want to be really, really diligent on infection control, but it's really about your team and providing resources for employee burnout. We already have a tough enough time with staff attrition, right? And finding really good people. The way you do that is going above and beyond with what your team needs right now.
that's awesome. And how much of the like PPE side of things is, involved in making sure that the team is safe and comfortable as well as the patients?
It's huge. And there was a time, and guys, I was in the wild, wild west with you. I had clients whose supplies got seized by the state. I was the crazy person that shipped cloth masks to clients, and they thought I was insane because they're like cloth masks when we have surgical masks. And I was just early on saying this mask is going to be a thing. Now we've come out the other side, thank goodness, right? For all of the awful things that are still happening with COVID, we have finally ramped up production to the point that you really should have that go-to supplier and a couple of backups, and you really need to understand your burn rate. CDC has a burn rate calculator on their website. Go use it. Find out how quickly your staff should be using their PPE. Make sure you're staffed for at least 30 days. And, if your burn rate's not matching up with what you expect, then take a closer look. Are they really using it properly? I know it's been a really big expense for the practice, but it's also do not go to contingency measures, don't reuse it unless you have to. I mean, that's kind of the basics, is making sure your team has the supplies that they need.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And in light of COVID, what I know that's what we've been consumed with, right? Just COVID this, COVID that. What are some of the big news events or just like big news topics that we're missing because we're so heavily focused on COVID?
So many. And I've been just as in the weeds as everybody on living, breathing COVID all day, every day. But in the meantime, there's been massive innovation in healthcare that we're just not really going to register until we come out of the other side of this thing. Major expansion in telemedicine. We do know that, of course. We were trying to avoid people coming in for for COVID testing and, maybe coming into the contact with the virus when, there's the obvious use of telemed in the COVID context is there.
Right.
But I do believe that that's here to stay. And we've seen CMS come up with a much greater range of reimbursement for telemed services. We should see a much greater push for payment parity between telemed that can really appropriately be delivered, care delivered via telemed, being paid the same as if you saw that person in office. And let's call a spade a spade. That's
Yeah.
80% of, the things that people end up in the emergency room or end up in urgent care that they could do a quick telemed visit for. I think that's so exciting
Yeah.
for cutting down on costs and increasing access to care. So as much as I hate that COVID was the catalyst for that, we've been trying to do that in telemedicine for a really long time
Oh yeah.
and making incremental steps. And now we finally have that watershed moment, right?
Right.
And on a similar note, the expansion of scope of practice for pharmacists and nurse practitioners, and the breaking down of state barriers, more of the interstate licensing, more of recognizing out-of-state practitioners. And, I understand some of the doctors' hesitation about that. They are worried about competition in some ways, and they're also worried about malpractice. But
Right.
again, there's so many things. And if you've had a really good nurse practitioner or a really good pharmacist, they're worth their weight in gold. They're great practitioners. They just don't have a medical degree. And they're really good at escalating it to you when it needs to be. So get that trusted person in and be excited about the fact that their scope of practice is expanding so you can be focused on your highest and best use. And I'm also really excited about the ability, again, for access to care and cost of care that these providers should be able to expand that scope of practice. And we are seeing a national trend towards that. Here in Florida, it was during COVID that massive nurse practitioner scope of practice legislation came out. So I'm a big proponent of that.
That's awesome. Funny story. My wife had her telemedicine visit, I think like 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's just like, why would I ever go back in? Like
Right?
it was just at that level where she got what she needed. She got the medicines that the doctor was still able to get, prescribed at the pharmacy, and it all still worked as if she went into the actual practice. And so, to your point, and we see a lot of doctors now really pushing telemedicine and telehealth to impact patients at a greater level or at a wider kind of impacting a wider audience because those people still need support and they can provide services at a reduced cost by them not having to travel to their practice and be seen in the practice. So I think you're exactly right. We're kind of forced into this, but it's good. I think we've been trying this for quite a long time. What do you see, with I guess the healthcare space or even in the legal space? What are some of your expectations for 2021 and beyond?
We're not out of the COVID weeds yet or woods yet. We know that. The big push, of course, is around vaccines, and much of your audience is as tapped into this as I am. But from my seat, this isn't the first round of vaccines. Isn't going to get it done. We've seen that it mutates quickly. Not a surprise for coronaviruses. Again, epidemiologists and virologists are saying this is behaving exactly like we thought. So you got to listen to what we're saying because we keep being right about this, right? So knowing that we've got variants in the UK and Brazil and that are mutating, that means it's all the more important that we get vaccinated for the strain that we have the vaccines for. It's really important that you go back for that second shot. I know there's some fear around side effects. The rates of allergic reactions are actually really, really low. It is much riskier to not get the vaccine than it is to get it. We
Yeah.
could also talk all day about vaccine education. There's a lot of reasons why people have fears, but if your team is slow to adopt vaccines, you need to spend a lot of time educating and communicating as to why it's safe and having some of the hard discussions around why they have fears. It's systemic racism in healthcare. It's not having the education of knowing, they may not know that the allergic reactions are that rare, or that the vaccine components, while the new technology is actually really exciting and awesome, everything else that's in there is stuff that have been in vaccines for a long time, and it just safely eliminates from your body. But those aren't things that people intuitively know, which means you as the clinician have to message that.
Yeah.
As the vaccine efforts ramp up, I get the $1,000,000 question of whether you mandate it for your team. And the legal answer is you can, as long as you allow exceptions for medical reasons. You're going to need to accommodate that, or religious objections. You can mandate it. The question is, should you?
Yeah.
The vaccine's not quite readily available enough. That may cause you staffing issues and just the culture piece of it, right? I'm going to force you to take a shot that you're scared of when, there's reasons to be nervous about a vaccine that was fast-tracked like this. But because I have this platform, Lamar, I have to say it because it's an opportunity to say something that I think is so important.
Absolutely.
Please do your homework on the vaccine, because the vast majority of you should get it as soon as it's available to you. And while the vaccine might make you feel a little crappy, you'll have some injection site pain. You might even get a low-grade fever or chills. If you're pregnant, make sure you take a Tylenol so that you avoid that fever. But after a few hours and no more than 48 hours, your body's going to be producing its own antibodies, and you are now Superman and Superwoman against this vicious virus. And we don't yet know if you can transmit the virus, even if you've already had it or you've already been vaccinated. You may still be able to spread it. So this is my soapbox moment of do the right thing for the rest of the world and get vaccinated and continue to do all of the measures that CDC says until they say it's safe to stop. That is the only way we get out the other side of this thing. And it'll probably take a couple years of a couple variations of the vaccine to come all the way out, but we have no hope if people don't continue to work. We're in this together.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, just you kind of enlightening us with, just the, related news and what we're not seeing and understanding as we're so heavily focused on COVID, but then also really touching on the COVID topics of, taking the vaccine and why you should take it, and just being informed and educated, and how we as a society can really move the needle and get back to normal life, I think is so critical. And then just really all the services that you offer, a lot of these physicians is so vital because they're trying to figure these things out a lot of the times on their own, and they can't successfully run their business that way. So outside of, I think you dropped the mic on the vaccination conversation.
Thank you. It's not my first or 100th time doing this, and I'm happy to come speak to your team, by the way, or to have a one-off with the docs that want help on this. This is my wheelhouse.
All right, awesome. So to that point, to conclude, what would you, let's say it's a new doctor, right, that you're in contact with, what information, if you could provide some, lasting information to them based on the services that you offer, what would that conversation look like?
For a new doctor right out of med school, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed?
Yeah, and they just bought a practice.
Okay, all right. Definitely hire slow, fire fast. Your team, while you are the captain of your ship and you are going to deliver excellent care, your team is going to be the difference from a patient experience and retention perspective. So that is really, really important that you get your right team in place and have the right employment agreements and all of those, documents that go along with it. Again, be very careful about partnerships, whether it's working for somebody else or it's giving a piece of your practice to somebody else. I always say it's not the same thing as like we can cheers a glass of wine and enjoy each other's company. There's actually a vision for a practice and a direction and a mission that you've got to both really be bought into, because the reality is something will come up that stresses you out. You will get into the day to day. And when those tensions arise, it's really, are you motivated by the same thing? And can you communicate in the same way? Because dealing with bad breakups is a big part of my job. And it's maybe my least favorite part. Nobody comes out the winner in the end, right? So I think those are two, kind of major takeaways for new docs. Keep your chin up too. I know there are times that, you put in the crazy hours and sometimes you feel like, you're just going through the motions. Take some time to take care of the headspace here too, right? You also need rest. You also need some mindfulness. You also need some mental health. Just because you're the clinician doesn't mean you aren't human. And your patients and your team will understand that too, especially now in the midst of COVID. It's so important that we talk about.
That's so awesome, sir. I truly appreciate you blessing us with your time and your knowledge and expertise. If any physician or doctor is listening to this and they're in the Florida area, or there's some legal counseling advice they need, what's the best way to contact you?
LinkedIn, I'm Sarah Connolly, Connolly. Find me on LinkedIn, or sarahconleylegal.com is my website. And I would be delighted to hear from you. Even if you're not sure that it's my wheelhouse, I'd love to connect with like-minded docs and I can point you in the right direction. So thrilled to meet your audience here today, Lamar, and I've really enjoyed our chat. I'm leaving energized.
Absolutely. So excited, and thank you for your time. It was just an amazing experience, and we will provide her information in the description. Again, I'm Lamar's Mentoring Interactive. This is Sarah Connolly, the legal counsel. Thank you for joining the Healthcare Digital Marketing Podcast.
Thank you, Lamar.